Story 1. I stepped on a used needle that was in the grass. It was very scary, so I went to the hospital to get it checked out. They performed some tests, and luckily, I did not contract anything. Story 2. You know it is bad when you step in something and your shoe starts to question your life choices. I still have not forgiven that mysterious pile of goo at the park. Story 3. I was feeling like I was about to vomit, so I got up to vomit in the kitchen sink. I did not make it and was not able to stop before stepping barefoot in the vomit. Worse, I slipped, fell, and slammed into the oven. Story 4. I ruined my shoes by stepping on fiberglass powder at this car parts warehouse where we trim and cut fiberglass all day. I was covered in fiberglass. I threw away my clothes and I had to throw away my shoes. I never returned to that job. Story 5. The worst place I ever stepped into was a house. In 9th grade, we were just smoking weed and drinking. But that house was bad. I walked out doing mushrooms, cocaine, and crack. That house was the worst place I ever stepped into. Story 6. Stepping barefoot in dog waste creates a squishing sensation between the toes that is quite distinct. Story 7. Fire ants. A whole nest of them. I was on a date, and when I realized what had happened, I jumped off the dock into waist-deep water, and the burning, excruciating pain stopped. So did the date. No loss. Story 8. My crazy grandfather threw a pet horse, who had died, into a pond instead of burying it. My cousin and I went barefoot in the pond when we were 11 and felt something like a ribcage. Then it hit us. Story 9. A rotting skunk corpse was the first thing I saw when I stepped out of my truck. Story 10. Human feces on the walkway to work. The worst possible time for this too. Story 11. I stepped barefoot onto a giant centipede in Florida when I was a child. It was traumatizing. Story 12. I once accidentally stepped on and killed a bat in my bare feet while going out on the veranda to air out my hockey equipment late at night. It screamed and squealed for a while before it shuffled off this earth. Story 13. When I was about 10, I was camping in my backyard. I woke up and slipped my sandals on very quickly without looking at them. I squished a fuzzy brown caterpillar between my big toe and the part of the sandal that goes between the big toe and the next toe. It was super disgusting. Story 14. My foster brother broke a glass panel on a storm door, and my parents thought the best place to put it after removing it was on the concrete pathway next to the house. 5-year-old me ran across it and then had to spend the next hour screaming as my mom removed glass from my feet. One shard was as big as my hand then. Story 15. I have 2 stories. I stepped on a slug while barefoot once and slipped on it like a banana peel. Around the same time, when jelly sandals were popular, I stepped in a fresh pile of Great Dane feces. It squished up through the toes and all the holes in the shoe. It was still lukewarm. At least I was on a beach, so I ran to the water and tried my best to wash myself. But that sandal was ruined. Story 16. Human waste. I was walking to a club and jaywalking through some cars. I am pretty sure it was waste from a drug addict, as I was in the Tenderloin district in San Francisco. Yes, those shoes never made it home after the club. Story 17. The dog did a nighttime number 2 in our front garden. It is a shared space, so I like to pick it up immediately. I came prepared with my bag and torch and searched. My dog likes to go in several places during one outing. My bare foot found one. Stepping on a snail barefoot is unpleasant for both me and the snail. Story 18. A redhead. Damn it, everything is true. You cannot shake them. Story 19. Hot puppy urine spread underneath my bedroom door first thing in the morning. Barefoot. Story 20. Urine and a roasted marshmallow. We were camping, and somehow I stepped in urine and then a roasted marshmallow that stuck to my bare foot. Story 21. I stepped on a huge slug with my bare feet. It took a week to remove all the mucus and everything else that stuck to it afterward. Story 22. I stepped on a dead baby bird outside a rest stop gas station in Indiana when it was 90 degrees outside. Story 23. A slug is barefoot. A couple of dead animals, 2 crows and a rat. Story 24. Okay, so I didn't step in it, but my hand went in it. I was crossing a creek, jumping from rock to rock. I jumped onto the shoreline and stumbled into a tree. My hand was covered in thick brown slime with little, almost transparent worms wiggling around in it. This substance was on my hand, and it smelled horrible. It seemed to be seeping out of the tree. I have never been more disgusted in my life, and to this day, I still don't know what it was. Story 25. Stepped in? Nothing too bad. Mud that vacuum sealed my sandal when I was a kid was probably the worst. It was beside a pond. Now stepped on, I've got a pretty bad one. The flat side of a nail was sticking up slightly from my backyard steps. I went to run outside as a kid and stepped on it. It went through my heel. It still makes me internally cringe thinking about it. Story 26. Half of a dead frog my cat left as a gift outside my bedroom door. Story 27. I was walking across a field and stepped on a snake. Scared me a lot. Story 28. Well, it is more on than in, but when I was 14, I stepped on a roofing nail. It went straight through my shoe and my foot. Story 29. A long line of fish hooks that got trapped in the surf. Story 30. Human feces in the middle of the sidewalk in broad daylight. Not the first time either. Constantly human feces in downtown Los Angeles. Story 31. I stepped on a mouse at work, at the register of a pizza place. First, I thought it was an artichoke heart or something, but when I looked back, I was horrified and immediately tried to contain it in front of customers. My coworker and friend, to this day, took care of it for me. I didn't ask, but there was no way it lived. It was so small and cute. I still feel bad about it. Story 32. A one-night stand with a coworker who happened to be married to a striker for the Home Association. Story 33. One time my wife stepped on something squishy while doing laundry. She held her foot up and said, "Oh my God, I can't look. What is it?" I burst out laughing. She had stepped on a baby mouse and smushed it all between her toes. So gross. She felt disgusted for a long time after that. Story 34. The plug-in of a charger. I was a kid and jumped from the top of a bunk bed straight onto a stray charger someone had left facing up. Story 35. A slug is so troublesome that you need to find a piece of wood or something similar to scrape it off. Story 36. When I was a child, we went to Yellowstone. We stopped at a rest area, and there was a giant log. I decided to put one leg on it to lean on it, and my leg went right through it. As it turns out, it was a giant piece of bison dung. My father thought it was funny. I did not. Story 37. Cow manure pretending it was a rock because I thought it was a rock. Story 38. Wet road tar crumbles that had not been cleaned up around a construction area literally ruined my shoes. It was like stepping in gum that never comes off. Story 39. I did not step in it, but my dachshund was sitting on my lap and threw up into my Ugg boot. Story 40. A cow patty, fresh and still warm. I was in my socks. This was during a Boy Scout campout. Story 41. Human feces. A stranger's feces. In brand new white sandals. On the sidewalk in San Francisco after stepping out the exit door from watching Hamilton for the first time. Story 42. A rat is running from trash bags on the side of the dark street in New York City. Story 43. About a month ago, I stepped onto a board with a nail sticking out of it. The nail went right through the sole of my shoe and into my foot. Thankfully, it was not rusty, and I had my tetanus shot a few years earlier. It really hurts a lot. Story 44. This happened in my late teens. I stepped on a dead rat in my dark driveway while talking to my friend who dropped me off. I did not realize it until I felt a swarm of red ants biting my feet and ankles. I am sure my sudden stop, turn, and run inside my house was quite comical. Story 45. I have two submissions. A slug, a newborn baby bird, popped. Neither of these was intentional. Story 46. 4-meter deep lubricant and coolant sump at a factory. It was my first day on the job, and I was wearing all the safety equipment plus a sealed respirator. I missed the first step and fell in. My safety gear held, so I was pulled out after what felt like an eternity in black goo. Nightmare fuel, I guarantee. Story 47. I found out I was allergic to hornets by disturbing a nest they made under our deck. I got stung more than 20 times, broke out in hives, and my mom gave me Benadryl. I would have preferred anaphylaxis over a trip to the emergency room. Story 48. Someone's yellow bile on a hospital room floor caused a slip and vomiting. Story 49. A frog when I was barefoot squished. I would rather have stepped in feces. Story 50. Right into the center of a decayed sheep. Foot covered in juice, maggots, and rot. Story 51. Not me, but someone in my book club. He was a tourist in India, I think Mumbai, and stepped on something squishy. He was a fetus. I was much more horrified than he was. Story 52. Police station in my town. The same police department that killed a man while handcuffed by slamming him on his head has had multiple lawsuits. They have had the K-9 unit attack people, turn off body cameras to beat individuals, and frequently charge people with crimes they did not commit. I am one of those people wrongly charged. They have a reputation for being the worst department. Our own sheriff said, "How is a killer still employed by an agency? You all must be very careful if a murderer has a badge and a gun and is still employed. If he does it once, he will do it again." Dunbar Police is an absolute disgrace, and I hope Winters faces consequences for charging me with a false charge and for killing that man who was already handcuffed when he was slammed on his head. Story 53. The sanitation black water tank on a Ticonderoga-class cruiser needed replacement float switches. I was there to replace them. Story 54. When I lived with my parents, I was going to dump a bucket of water off the back porch. I took one step out barefoot and felt a crunch under my foot, and then it was sticky. I had stepped on a slug that was right outside the back door. I had never encountered one before. I guess it was still alive because after I got it off my foot and went inside for 30 minutes, I came back out and it was gone. Story 55. Cold vomit on the shag carpet. I was 3 to 4 years old and had thrown up by the bed, then went back to sleep. Story 56. Playing in the woods and stepping on a number of slugs barefoot, no less. Story 57. Lizards that my cats brought in. There are two kinds: cold, clammy rubber lizards or crunchy Jurassic lizards. Neither one is fun to step on in the dark on the way to the bathroom. Story 58. A ground bee's nest when I was 3 years old. My parents said I was stung over 50 times. An old rusted nail barefoot in a shed went into the bottom of my foot. I stepped on a toothpick, and it went into the bottom of my foot. I was also bitten by a snake while barefoot. Story 59. A 4-inch nail was sticking out of a piece of wood. It was at the bottom of some stairs, so it went right through my Converse shoe, through my foot, and out the top of the sneaker. Story 60. Dead, practically disemboweled bunny. My parents' outdoor cat had brought it inside and left it on the carpet. I went downstairs for a drink in the middle of the night and, well, Story 61. I walked barefoot into my parents' guest bathroom one night in the dark to brush my teeth while visiting for the weekend. I felt a warm, wet, slimy sensation ooze between my toes. I turned on the light to see what it was and was greeted by a mostly complete mouse that one of my mom's cats had regurgitated onto the floor for me to find with my bare foot. It was still quite warm and the mucus very slippery, so it had just happened. The cat who left this surprise goes by the nickname the Vomit Comet because she eats things whole and is known for vomiting. Mom has stepped in her messes before, but never a whole mouse. Lucky me. Story 62. When I was about 7, we had not fenced in our backyard, and we had a neighbor who refused to clean up after her dog. However, if anyone else's dog pooped in her yard, she would throw a fit. Her dog pooped in our yard between the trampoline and the deck. I stepped in it barefoot. Story 63. Stepped in a puddle. Then the next thing I was neck-deep in floodwater. Story 64. When I was younger, I wore thumb flip-flops outside, and a shard of glass went right through one into my foot. My dad had old slivers of glass in his body from a car accident and would remove them using a shaving razor blade, one of the cheap plastic ones with dual blades you can get at a dollar store. One was on the floor in my parents' room, and it sliced deep into the crease of the underside of my big toe. I was about 8 years old. My grandmother lived across the street from her sister, and I walked across the street to my great-aunt's house. When I got into the grass on the side of the road, Something started splashing up my legs from my flip-flops. It was diarrhea. Apparently, my brother had an accident trying to make it to the bathroom. When I was 17, I was cutting grass for a man and hit a hole in the ground. Bees started flying around me. Then I realized I was being stung, so I ran down the street to get away. As I started to walk back, I felt a sharp pain in my shin. I unrolled my sock and a bee flew out. That was the day I found out underground beehives exist. Story 65. Broken glass when I was under 5 years old. Blood everywhere, needed stitches. To this day, I am 99% socks. I only recently started sleeping without socks. Story 66. I was on a call the other day as a paramedic where we had a bariatric elderly lady who had been lying on the ground after a fall, unable to get up, for approximately 14 hours. She was found early in the morning when her pharmacy delivery person came to drop off her medications and heard her yelling when he knocked on the door. We were dispatched with lights and sirens for a medical unknown, and the Ontario Provincial Police broke her door to allow us entry. My partner and I entered the residence, made contact with the patient, and began our assessments. She was confused, weak, smelled like a severe urinary tract infection, and had a horrendous body odor. Her vital signs were relatively stable. We concluded that she was stable enough to stand and pivot onto our stair chair for extrication. We hoisted her up with great effort and began to walk and pivot her onto the chair. Because she was a large woman, and I couldn't see my feet as I moved, I stepped in the largest pile of human feces I have ever seen. It was on a carpeted floor. Even with my boots on, it felt gross, and the smell was beyond atrocious. Her body shape and already pungent odors had masked and trapped the smell until we moved her. As soon as I got out to the ambulance, I began to douse my boots with disinfecting wipes and fully sprayed them off at the hospital. I swapped them out at my base for good measure. This does not even make the top 20 worst things I have ever smelled in my profession. Story 67. Chiggerbugs do not sound that bad, but that is how I found out I was allergic. Story 68. Hornets nest in a forest while hunting. I ran to a stream and jumped underwater. I got stung on the end of my thumb. That was very painful. Story 69. A big banana slug. Yes, hard to clean off, barefoot. Yep, a banana slug is gross. Story 70. Showers at swimming pools. I ended up with about 20 plantar warts on my feet that were burned off. It hurt terribly. Story 71. Human body fluids from erotic asphyxiation gone wrong. A clown adult film is playing in the background. Full body exit and maggots. Story 72. Stepped barefoot in cat feces. Also once stepped in some tar at the beach that did not fully come off my foot for at least a month. Story 73. Barefoot is not so bad. Wearing socks is worse. Some things just do not wash off. Story 74. One day I was walking along the side of the street, on a dirt path where the sidewalk should have been. Distracted by texting my friend and pretty intoxicated from drinking all morning, I accidentally stepped right onto a dead possum. It was dead and partially scavenged, which was quite unpleasant. Being 17, I just thought, whoa, what the heck? And kept going. Side note, I was wearing Dr. Martens boots, so it probably didn't feel as bad as if I had been wearing Vans or Toms. Story 75. I was vomiting and wearing socks. I was babysitting, and the child was in so much distress from being unwell that I only realized how unpleasant it was once we were both cleaned up. Story 76. I once stepped on a large slug while walking barefoot down a steep grassy hill. It squished between my toes, and I crushed the poor slimy creature. I could not do anything about it or I would have fallen. I was on a date with my boyfriend and felt horrified, grossed out, and embarrassed. It was not very romantic. Story 77. Injured mouse that my cat left for me. I was pregnant at the time, and it squeaked when I stepped on it. I was on my way to the bathroom for the third time that night. Story 78. A dead opossum in the open stew stage of decomposition. Story 79. Stepped on a large slug while barefoot. I screamed. It was disgusting. Story 80. I was exploring an abandoned zoo in the woods. There was a bathtub-shaped hole dug into the ground, covered with mud and grass. Underneath the mud and grass, it was full of water. I stepped directly into it and had muddy water up to my knee for the rest of the night. Story 81. A few weeks ago, I was constipated for a couple of days. I took some milk of magnesia before I went to bed. I got up really early in the morning, about 3 a.m., because I usually get up early and go to bed early. I am over 60 years old. I stretched, rode my bike for half an hour, made breakfast, and after I ate, I got online for a while. I could feel my bowels moving, but I did not pay it any mind. Suddenly and violently, I felt something coming down the canal. I quickly tried to go to the bathroom, squeezing my buttocks shut. I almost made it. At the same time, I pulled down my underwear and sat on the toilet. My sphincter must have relaxed, and I made a mess all over the toilet, the floor, and the walls. It was awful. I jumped in the shower and washed myself off, then began cleaning the mess from the toilet, floor, and walls. It was horrible. Story 82. A fire ant colony I did not see. What makes it worse is I had not only stepped on it, but also knelt directly on it while changing a reciprocating saw blade while building my new deck. I threw that reciprocating saw and started knocking them off me straight out of a nightmare. Story 83. Afterbirth from a cow. Second worst was a frog. I did not see him. I was too busy talking to my dog, and he must have jumped under my foot. He suddenly popped. Story 84. I didn't exactly step in it, but when I was about 10 years old, I accidentally stepped on a cockroach that was lying on its back with my bare foot. Story 85. I had a roofing nail in the bottom of my foot. I had to pull it out. It was not fun. Story 86. A Lego. It doesn't matter what else I step in. Nothing compares. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.